Hey guys, this is Courtney from Willow's Bloom. Today we're going to be discussing a very, very important topic that is honestly massive, so I'm not going to be able to get to all of it, but I did want to give you guys some larger themes and concepts to work with, give you guys examples of outer planet transits, because these will mark really big chapters and turning points in our life. And I guarantee you, if you go back to outer planet transits, like especially with Saturn, Uranus, and their squares or oppositions, you will really start to see that that was a year in which you had a huge revelation, a huge change up or hardship that made you divert from your original path. And so we see some of the biggest life changes during outer planet transits, and it's because these planets move so slowly. So today we're going to be going over what they might mean, and again, giving examples so you guys can start to notice these cycles and themes occurring in your lifetime. So let's talk about what the outer planets are, first of all. So I'm just going to put my face up here, I guess. So these are the inner planets, the personal planets. And then the outer planets are Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. The ones that typically have the most noticeable transits, or kind of, I mean, if you don't know what transits are, this video is probably too advanced for you, but I will give a really quick reminder that transits are basically where the planets are nowadays or at a certain period of time in comparison to where they are in our natal chart. So they can make certain aspects with each other. So if you're not familiar about what transits are, what aspects are, this is probably not the video for you, or you can just come back to it and save it for when your studies are more advanced. Okay, so as I was mentioning, the biggest planetary transits that we really tend to feel are going to be Saturn and Uranus, although we can really feel Pluto, Neptune, and Jupiter. Sometimes those planets are a little bit harder to pinpoint to an exact event, but there are times in which they're very clear. So what do these planets signify? Well, the reason why we need to know what each planet means is because during their transit, there are going to be huge themes around this planet that come up. So, for example, Jupiter is a planet of learning and growth, extending beyond your current limits. So whenever you have a Jupiter transit, you may have a lot more opportunities come in. You may meet new teachers. You may question what in your life has been holding you back from your greatest potential. And so the transit will really be informed by that planet's theme. Saturn also represents maturity, responsibility, duty, hardship, restrictions, karma, truth, having to kind of pay for one's past debts. And so we will often see with a Saturn transit, people really leveling up in their lives because they are maybe achieving something after a long amount of effort that they've put into something, or they might have past karma come back around where things come and bite them in the butt if they haven't been working very hard. There's a lot of endings that happen during Saturn transits and very kind of harsh energy that can come. Or again, you can kind of get blessings, but it's always because of your sweat equity rather than just things coming to you like Jupiter can do. Uranus has to do with change, upheaval, progress, the new, the erratic, the unexpected, dissatisfied with the status quo. So this is where we start to see our lives become destabilized. During a Uranus transit, you can't necessarily hold on to or expect something to occur because you don't always have control over the outcome or over what's going on. This is a transit that's trying to bring things up to the surface in order to make change. So if you've been kind of settled down into a routine and it's really not working for you, it's going to bring up feelings of dissatisfaction to the surface so that you can change them, or it will bring about change if you've been resisting change. Neptune has to do with dissolving, letting go, surrendering, slowness, spirituality, sickness, meditation. So during Neptune transits, you might retire, you might have a child, you might leave one phase of life and enter into another. And generally it's going to be followed with confusion. Oh, I know that I can't have this old thing anymore, this old life anymore, but I also don't really know what my new life is. And so it's almost like this limbo period that Neptune can bring us, where we are asking ourselves more existential questions. Who am I as a soul? What am I here to do? What do I need to let go of in material realms or that I've attached my identity to in order to kind of better move through life in a more authentic and loving, soul-oriented way. Lastly, we have Pluto, which represents death, birth, control issues, facing suppressed psychological issues, insecurities, fears. So all these planets have even more significations than I'm mentioning, but I am giving some important ones. So Pluto transits are usually ones that are very transformative, but also kind of can be hard to pinpoint because they're such long transits. Pluto moves the slowest out of all the planets. You can see it's the very last one. And so we tend to notice Pluto and its transformation on us well after it's gone. We've already passed through that transit, well after it's gone from that place in our chart. And so what we'll normally be confronted with is our shadow when Pluto comes up. So all the things that we have not been able to or wanted to face. If you know anything about the subconscious mind, you'll know that we are really great at suppressing information that is too intense to manage. And what happens as we age, if we become healthier or if our brain just somehow decides that it's time, some of these subconscious things can emerge and become conscious. And that is, I believe, linked to our Pluto transits. When things come up from the depths of our shadow or our suppressed subconscious to be dealt with, to be resolved, to be released, so that we cannot be controlled by our fears and our shadows. So, all really big, important planets and all really big, important transits. Let's have a look a little bit into each one, and then I'll give you guys some examples. Okay, so we're going to start off with the Jupiter and its cycle, Jupiter cycle. So Jupiter spends about a year in one sign, which means that it's going to be taking 12 full years for it to come back to where it was when you were born. So I have Jupiter in Libra. So around 12 years old, I'm going to have another, Jupiter will return to a sign of Libra and it will be conjunct my natal Jupiter. So essentially what happens is whenever you have a Jupiter return, you are given the opportunity for a new cycle of learning. So your first 12 years of life, you might be learning one specific lesson, and it could have to do with kind of what is represented by your Jupiter. You may be unpacking the different layers each 12 years around the aspects and the house and the sign that Jupiter is in your chart. So it's very personal. And it will also depend on what other transits you have going on at the time as well. That's always going to color it. But once you have, once you have your Jupiter return, it's almost like Jupiter is then telling you, okay, this is your new homework. This is what I want you to do as a soul. And it might not be this aha moment. It might not be super, super clear about what it is, but it's the planting of the seed that over the next 12 years, you then will understand. You will then fully learn about and integrate and grow into. And when it comes back to its return position, you are likely to bear the fruit of those lessons. So becoming a better person, understanding more about yourself. Maybe it's a more material benefit. Maybe you start succeeding more in your career. It's just really going to depend on the person. But then you reap the benefits and get your new kind of lesson. So that's what a Jupiter cycle is all about. And during each cycle, as it's going around the entire zodiac, there are core check-in points represented by tense aspects like the square and opposition. These check-in points are going to be times in your life where you are looking at this growth and progress that you are trying to reach towards, and you are going to ask yourself, do I need to make big changes? What important questions do I need to ask myself so that I am able to keep moving forward and making progress? And what adjustments do I need to make? So the Jupiter squares and oppositions will occur with your natal Jupiter around every 3 years, and they don't last very long. It's just like 10 days. So during this period of time, during these 10 days, you'll really start to check in and ask yourself, does this feel good? Do I want to continue doing this? Do I want to stop doing this? And it's possible to even have breakups during this time because maybe that relationship was holding you back. Maybe you actually have more potential without that person. And so during a Jupiter square opposition, you'll really start to feel that limitation. And Jupiter's like, no, I know I can do so much more. And there's usually some level of optimism or excitement or something that you're getting on the other side of that decision. It's not just a hard life choice and then you have to figure it out from there. It feels like I'm leaving behind this smaller thing to get this bigger thing. It's an upgrade essentially. And so even though it may be uncomfortable, it's ultimately something that feels exciting in the end. Jupiter retrogrades for 120 days in each sign. And so basically for a few months out of the year, it's going to be retrograde. So Jupiter retrograde is relatively common in a birth chart, not that big of a deal. Jupiter retrograde is always a time for us to kind of check in with that growth process, just like we do at the squares and oppositions. But it's a more internal and reflective period where we're reviewing everything rather than maybe being presented with discomfort or one specific situation that we have to address. It's really more so us integrating and internalizing our forward momentum and our experience. And it's a really big time as well when Jupiter retrogrades to examine your belief systems, because one of the things that happens during Jupiter's cycle is we will become more informed and wise about the world. So we go out, Jupiter gives us our mission, we go out and we learn certain lessons, and we come back with that wisdom and a set of new core beliefs that we can act upon. And so during the retrograde cycle, during the year, you may kind of ask yourself, do my beliefs really align fully, or how do I need to maybe adjust some of those beliefs or go further into them? Am I acting in according with beliefs? All of those things can come up. So when Jupiter transits to a natal house or a natal planet, you will usually see some kind of improvement in this area of your life. And if it feels like it's not an improvement, it's usually because you are leaving one thing behind for something better. And like I was saying before, Jupiter is going to tend to upgrade us or give us a potential for a lot of positivity later down the line. However, if there are other bad, quote unquote, negative, difficult transits happening at the time, Jupiter can exaggerate the difficulties. Jupiter can make you feel a bigger type of way, but it can also be kind of like the agent that helps you synthesize or metabolize that experience and take out the wisdom from it and utilize it for yourself. So it can exaggerate, or it can help you connect to the bigger picture of what's really going on, why this is happening, and help you maintain hope and faith. So there are numerous ways in which Jupiter can act in our life, but mostly it's going to be a positive one. So wherever Jupiter is transiting in your chart is going to give you a lot more opportunities generally to learn about this part of yourself, or to receive some kind of blessing or opportunity as a result of your previous learnings. So for example, Jupiter coming over my natal Venus could indicate that I may have more financial prosperity at that time. Or Jupiter moving through the sign of Libra, which is also my second house, could again be financial prosperity. Jupiter coming over my Venus could also indicate maybe a new relationship coming into my life. There are many different ways in which we can take a look at that, but it's going to depend on your natal chart. So definitely get a reading if you're not sure how to read that for yourself. Okay, so now let's go ahead and move on to Saturn. So Saturn spends about 2.5 years in each sign, and it has a full 30-year cycle. So people talk about the Saturn return and whine about it all the time, and this is what they're talking about. Saturn takes about 28 to 30 years to return to where it was in your natal chart when you were born. So this is a time in which we are really checking in with ourselves about our investments in energy and time. Saturn is the god of time. It has a lot to do with our sense of discipline, duty, responsibility, our karma. And so around age 30, we may have to check in and kind of pay up karma around certain areas of our life, especially areas where we are behind in some way, where Saturn's like, I gave you a lot of chances to be a kid, and now you don't have any more chances. You need to get this right. You can't keep making this mistake. And so you get this feeling that life is harsh, or things won't work out in your favor if you don't make changes, or no one's coming in to save you, and you have to grow up. You have to meet the expectations that life is putting on you. And so Saturn gives you this kind of pressure, and you may feel a certain amount of stress or pessimism around these times when Saturn is making a transit to a personal planet or having a Saturn return. It's generally this feeling of, now is the time to buck up, and if you don't do it now, you're going to be a failure, or you're going to be this or that. There is some negativity that comes with Saturn when we haven't been honorable, when we haven't been disciplined and diligent, and we can feel its transits the most. And what's interesting is, if you notice, there is a psychological principle in relationships called the 7-year itch, where around 7 years, couples start to feel like their relationship is drying out. They might look for interest elsewhere and cheat on their partner or end a relationship. There's this feeling of dissatisfaction that can creep in around 7 years. What's interesting about that is that Saturn has a cycle of 7 years. So its full cycle is 30 years, where it returns to where it was when you were born. So you have these 30 years to really grow up and mature. And these represent like really big life chapters. Like, okay, my first 30 years are about finding out my identity and stepping into adulthood. The next 30 years are about the maturation into adulthood. And then maybe the next 30 years are about kind of slowing down into this different cycle, or giving back, and so on and so forth. So it's orienting from all about me to taking on responsibility for others, and really taking the most advantage of my talents and abilities, to giving back, to letting go, all these different kind of phases of life. So Saturn 30-year cycles represent those major chapters. But then every 7 years, Saturn will make a square or an opposition to your natal Saturn. And this is during in this time, this feeling or energy where Saturn is making a square opposition can last from 3 months to a year, depending on its retrograde cycle. It could kind of pass a point and then come back, and pass a point, come back, or it could just leave. And so it could be relatively short or kind of long, where you're experiencing this dryness or this pessimism or this uncertainty about what you have already invested into. And so, as I mentioned, people experience these 7-year itches in relationships. And actually in astrology, every relationship has its own chart. And so the Saturn will also have its own cycle within the relationship. And so when 7 years later, the Saturn is making a square to the relationship natal Saturn, and at that time, you'll kind of see that the relationship becomes dried out. And it's this turning point where you ask yourself, do I really want to keep investing in this? Saturn has a lot to do with habitual things. So am I going to keep going? Am I going to do what I've always done? Or am I going to make changes? And those changes are often hard won. They are often like, it takes a lot of effort. But that's why Saturn puts so much pressure, because otherwise we'll just kind of keep doing the things that we've always done, and we'll keep getting these negative results. So the squares and oppositions are these kind of eureka moments where, like maybe like a more pessimistic eureka moment, where we're like, oh my gosh, I am just so dissatisfied with this area of my life. I have been such a POS. I have been, responsible for all these issues. Like, what is my deal? And you really start to see these things emerge. And again, it can be quite hard on yourself, where you either have to pay certain consequences for things, or where you realize certain things about yourself that are not always positive. And as a result of that intense dissatisfaction and realism about the self, maybe a little bit of pessimism as well, you start to make big changes. And this is when you level up as an adult. And again, this is going to be happening every 30 years on the return, but also every 7 years. So whatever is going on with Saturn at that time in your life and in your chart, you'll start to really see those areas level up and mature, or kind of get torn down and make you have to work your way back up to something, to a new beginning. And you'll really get the chance to sit with an area of your life in the ways in which you haven't lived up to your potential, but not in the same way that Jupiter does, which is through blessings and opportunities. It's through a point of crisis, or having something being taken away or ending, or given more responsibility, or just getting a reality check of some sort. So it can be kind of an uncomfortable time. And so when you experience that 7-year itch in a relationship, it's really the time to ask yourself, do I want to continue investing in this? Because this 7-year itch, or this feeling of dissatisfaction that I'm getting right now, if it's happening during the Saturn square, it's trying to bring more effort into your relationship. If you haven't really been feeling that building up to that, or, after that, it's really that Saturn cycle that's having you level up rather than just trying to get you to walk away. However, if you've been feeling dissatisfied even up to that point, and then it gets a lot worse during the Saturn square opposition, then you will definitely want to walk away. It's something that's like, if it's already weak, you will be challenged and the weak links will break. But if it's strong enough, it can maintain itself through any cycle, and it becomes even stronger as a result. It's asking you again to put more effort, which will make it stronger as a result. Saturn retrogrades for about 4.5 months every year, so a lot of people have natal Saturn retrograde. Not a big deal, but it can indicate boundary issues around that area of your life, wherever Saturn is located. And so when Saturn transits a house, you will really feel this pressure for these 2.5 years to become very much invested into that area of your life. So for example, right now I have Saturn in my 5th house, and I have been trying lots of different hobbies and picking up lots of different skills. I have been working a lot on my personal self-expression. My dating life has, I've had to put a lot of effort into this area of my life and not just take things for granted. And so I really can start to see how Saturn is asking me to become more mature in this way. When Saturn transits a planet or aspects of planet, this is when we can really start to feel like this area of our life is not going well. And that's not always going to be the case. It could be the opposite, where it's going really well, and we just become overwhelmed. So for example, Saturn transiting the sun can make you extremely busy. So your career can be taking off, but it's going to be very overwhelming, and you're going to have to realize, how do I manage my energy? What do I really want out of life? Can I sustain this? Can I create systems? Can I delegate? It's asking you to really level up in this area of your identity and your career. And it's a time for you to basically set yourself up for success. Or it could be really a hard time. And this is, again, kind of dependent on your natal chart and what your natal promises, which means like what you were kind of born with. If you were born to have certain struggles, then you might not get as many blessings from Saturn during certain times because of the way that it's aspecting planets in your chart. So let's say, for example, that Saturn is aspecting your Venus, and your natal Venus is square Pluto and square Saturn natally. So you kind of have a lot going on with your natal Venus anyway. Let's say it's in detriment, it's in a sign it doesn't like to be in, and it's in the 8th house. During that time, you're probably going to have to meet your worst fears related to relationships. You may go through a crisis of debt. You may have a loss of a loved one, and it may really send you into like an emotional tailspin. But you're going to learn so much from that. So it's like this period of time that you're going to look back on your life and be like, wow, I completely changed during that time. I kind of fell to pieces, but I completely grew and changed. So whatever it is within Saturn cycle, if it's good or if it's bad, either way, it's going to kind of give you this push to really change who you are. And it's truly only through pressure that we change as humans. We are so stubborn. We're so stuck in our ways. And so we really need this from the universe. So don't dread Saturn cycles, because you really never know what you're going to get. I'll also say sometimes Saturn doesn't have like a very obvious part of your life. So I've heard people who have Saturn returns who like changed their jobs and changed relationships and moved and like everything in their life. Sorry, someone just called me. So I've seen people have those massive changes during Saturn returns, but I've also seen people look back, 10, 20 years later and be like, actually, there wasn't anything really noticeable during that time. I didn't really feel this huge change in my life. And I will say that I think that sometimes there will be other transits that are just a bigger deal in your chart. Maybe there's just not a lot that you're having to learn at that time. But overall, I think most people, when they turn 30 or when they turn 60, are really feeling this change in their life of, now I'm becoming 30, now I'm becoming an adult, now I'm getting into close to the age of retirement at age 60. It's like we're starting to look at life a little bit differently. So even if you don't have a whole blow up in your life or this massive change, you're definitely considering life in a different way than you have before. All right, let's look at Uranus. So Uranus is definitely a noticeable planet. I'd be very surprised if you're going through a Uranus transit and not feeling it. Uranus spends about 7 years in a sign, so it has an 84-year cycle. So it will take 84 years to return to where it was when you were born, which is almost like a lifetime. So we basically don't have many cycles of Uranus. We just have one life cycle of Uranus typically. And so the squares and oppositions occur around every 21 years, more or less, like a couple years, more or less, because of its orbit. It can last for like 7 months. So I was looking at my chart and I was like, okay, yeah, this one lasts like 7 months for me. But that will vary again, depending on its retrograde pattern. So when we think about the Uranus transits, like for example, the square that happens around 21 to 24, the opposition which happens in your early to mid 40s, and then the square that happens around early to mid 60s. These are times of big upheaval and change. What happens when you turn 21 in the United States? You are starting to, first of all, you can drink. You're starting to leave college. You are faced with this newfound identity of being an adult, but you're also you're already an adult at 18, but really the kind of maturity that comes after you leave college and can drink, and you're really kind of fully pushed out into society. You're not in any more incubators. You are here, right? And so it's at this time that you're reckoning with your bigness as an adult versus your smallness as somebody who maybe still doesn't really know much about themselves. You're facing life as a young soul who has had limited contact with people and places and circumstances and experiences in general. And you're facing this really big, wide world. And so this Uranus cycle is also a time in which you might be testing out your rebelliousness and your will and your identity and trying to figure all of that out in the context of society. The next Uranus cycle happens around your midlife crisis. So this is usually what we're seeing with Uranus and Neptune around midlife, that people are like, no, what's my identity now? I'm going to rebel and I'm going to get this, red Jaguar, and I'm going to date a 17-year-old or 18-year-old to keep it legal. And I'm going to be like quitting my job and leaving my family. And I mean, that's obviously like an extreme, but you guys see these midlife crises happen. You feel the angst of somebody who has not fully settled into themselves. And we all experience this. We all experience this time in our life where we are facing this next cycle, this kind of checkpoint. And there are things where we feel like, well, did I really get to do everything I wanted to do as a kid? Did I really get to experience all that liveliness and funness in college that I wanted? Or are there still some things I want to do? Or do I still want to go, be rebellious and be silly at age 21 and, not have to become an adult? And then in the middle age, in the midlife crisis, you might feel like, oh my gosh, how did I get here? I have so many responsibilities, so many things that hold me back. What happened to my youth? How can I still maintain my sense of freedom in this life? How can I still maintain my individuality and not be defined by all these things that have put me into a box these last 10 years. And so you start to break out of that box and think about, what has limited you, what has taken away your freedom, and you resist it, you fight it. And I think that these are important parts of our life because while it can lead to somewhat erratic behavior and things that don't actually last, it at the end of the day is an expression of our desire for freedom. And so I think that people who are out of touch with themselves or who maybe have been too restricted in the past or both may really try to break free in super crazy ways and then regret it later because they maybe just go to an extreme. But at the end of the day, what they do need is some kind of change up in their life because what they're currently doing isn't working. And so they have been neglecting themselves and their needs and their desires in some capacity for so long that it builds up to this point of, I have to date an 18-year-old and leave my family. And if they had just kind of checked in with themselves along the way, it probably wouldn't have gotten to that point. And so a Uranus cycle shakes us awake and says, you don't want this anymore. What is your truth? What is your freedom? Let's go find it. And you kind of get to make with that what you will. And some people take it too far, and some people, just find the right thing by not acting impulsively and listening to that feeling, not ignoring that feeling, but also not going into extremes. And that also happens around age 63. So this is near retirement time. It's like, okay, now I'm nearing the end of my life. I don't have that many years left. I have a nice chunk left, but there are certain things that I'm never going to have. There are certain people that I'm never going to meet or sleep with or be with or anything. And it's like a time where you have to then kind of face those things as well as, what level of change and freedom do I want for this last cycle of my life versus the previous cycles. Uranus retrogrades 5 months out of the year, so many, many people will have it retrograde. When it transits to a house, again, it is slow moving. It spends 7 years in a sign. So if it's transiting to a house or to a planet, it's going to be this often like sudden shock. Like something will happen usually when Uranus moves into a house for the first time. So if it's just moving into your 7th house, you could break up. You could need to move apart and live in different places. You could need just some change in your relationship. If it moves into your 4th house, you might move countries, or 9th house, or you might move homes where you've lived your same place your whole life. So it's like a really marked time when it does cross over a house cusp. Or if it's with a planet, you will usually notice a really big shift in that area of your life as well. So let's say like Uranus is aspecting Venus, you might have a sudden disruption in your relationship. Suddenly find something out about your partner or realize that you're not happy anymore and suddenly leave them. These are kind of hard examples, but there are a lot of ways in which we can have sudden breaks of money. Maybe you could win the lottery if you have a Uranus conjunct your Venus transit. So there's lots of different things that can happen from this, but generally what's coming from it is more freedom, something that we don't expect, something that's atypical of our own behavior, something that people would look twice at us like, what are you doing today? Courtney never does that. Like, why is she doing that? That's kind of the gist of this here. So yes, that is Uranus. And then Neptune spends about 14 years in a sign. So it has a 165-year cycle to return to where it was when we were born, which is obviously currently not possible since we do not live that long, unfortunately. So Neptune squares happen around 42 years of age, and the oppositions happen around 84 years of age. So we'd only have one square, one opposition, and these do kind of coincide with Uranus's opposition and return. And so their energy really mixes together where we're having to maybe let go of some version of ourselves. And then the Uranus energy is saying, how can I create and establish more authenticity in this next level or new version of myself? So Neptune takes away and Uranus helps us kind of resupply in a new direction. And the duration of Neptune transits are usually from 9 to 12 months, so they're very long. So there's kind of long, drawn out process where we may be in this liminal state or this state of confusion about where we are at in our lives or what our identity really is. That's part of the midlife crisis and why Uranus does bring truth, but the Neptune brings confusion. So you're having your Neptune square, and you're like, what am I where am I going? Do I want this? Do I want that? I'm so confused. You might lie to yourself. You might get caught up in situations that are just like, trying to teach you something, basically. And they're not necessarily always super truthful. Or you may have to face, ways in which you have been lying to yourself or deceived in the past. So it can kind of come up in multiple areas. But there's usually some process of surrendering and letting go. And I already mentioned examples of this would be like retiring, or facing the, old age or the process of slowly kind of passing away, which happens with a Neptune opposition at 84. You're really checking in with yourself and your life. Like, wow, I don't know how much time I have. Like now I really have to be reliant on others, and it's really hard for me to do everything I used to do. And it's like you are having to really surrender to things outside of your control, which is your natural aging process. Neptune retrograde 6 months out of the year. So lots of people have Neptune retrograde. So a transit from Neptune to a house can usually bring more soul searching and more confusion to that area of your life. It can also, again, bring a need to surrender. Sometimes it can bring about like really fantastical experiences like, oh, this is the person I've always wanted. But oftentimes Neptune can also, like, let's say Neptune transits the 7th, you might find this amazing partner, and then like a few years later, they're just not really who you thought they were. This will depend on the rest of the transits happening, but oftentimes there is just like we're just not seeing things as clearly as we normally would. And so wherever Neptune is transiting through your chart, you may be forced to slow down, kind of make your way through the fog and figure out what you want in a more emotional, intuitive level than having a very clear idea about what's next. So, for example, Neptune transiting ascendant, I've seen this. Also, I've seen this in a client who has Pisces ascendant, and she has lots of planets in her first house in Pisces, and Neptune's transiting them, and she's just experiencing certain health things going on that are rather difficult, because Neptune can make you prone to illness, to weakness, essentially. And so wherever it is transiting, you may be kind of forced again to take a step back to kind of review things, or I guess like disengage from things is what I mean. Like not be so external, but be more internal. And this could apply specifically to whatever house or planet you are experiencing the transit to. Okay, lastly, we have the Pluto cycles, and then we're going to jump into some examples. So Pluto is a generational planet, so its transits are not as important when we're talking about transits to natal Pluto, from Pluto to Pluto. These are not as important because everyone in your generation is going through that Pluto square Pluto, or Pluto trine Pluto, or Pluto. I mean, no one's going through Pluto opposite Pluto, but regardless, everyone's going through that at the same time, so it's like not very significant. Pluto spends 14 to 31 years in each sign. It has an elliptical, strange orbit, so it is kind of all over the place. We don't know how long. I mean, not that we don't know, but we can't say like, oh, it spends 10 years in a sign, because it spends a lot longer in some signs, a lot shorter in other signs. So it takes 248 years to return to where it was when you're born. Obviously never going to happen. So what is important with Pluto? Because square Pluto is not that big of a deal, because it's, again, happening with everyone around your 30s and 40s. And yeah, your Pluto opposition is never going to happen. So what is important here is when Pluto transits to a new house, to an angle, or to a personal planet, you will feel this. Although, as I mentioned, it's so slow. It can take years passing over a planet. And because it takes years and you're like fully entrenched in this experience, it's really hard to separate yourself and be like, this specific event happened when Pluto conjuncted my moon. which is happening to me right now. And I'm actually about to wrap that up. But now that I'm starting to come out of this cycle, I think this is my last month where it's exact over my moon. It's been like that for years. But now that I'm starting to finally come out of it, I can start to see what I was learning from this experience, what I had to face about myself, my relationship with my childhood and my mother and my emotions and my anger and my insecurities and my jealousies and all the things that are shadows within me have come to the surface during these cycles. And so whatever planet Pluto's transiting is going to do a lot of this soul searching work, and it's slow, it's timely. There may be big events, but also it's something that's dragged out so long that it's like this massive slow transformation. It's like a tree growing, it happens in 3 years. The tree's already grown and has fruit, and you're like, wait, but I didn't see it happen. And it's like if you look from the very beginning to the end, you see it happen, but it's the daily progress. It's chipping away that you can't really put it into like a defined moment. And so we're going to look at some examples where Pluto does have more of a defined moment, because sometimes there are a few key things. And then from that, we are then triggered to transform many aspects of ourselves. But the Pluto transit is way more than just that event. It has so much more to it. And I will say, when Pluto went over my moon, I also bought a house, which I never thought I would do ever, because I'm always moving and traveling. And I finally kind of settled into a place and bought a house, which was highly unusual for me. So Pluto coming over my moon, if I did pick like one thing to represent this transit, would be that. But then there has been so many other things that I've grown and learned about myself as a result. And that was kind of just one particular event. And so we will see in these upcoming examples kind of how this can turn out. But I don't even know. I get so tired when I record for a long time. And I feel like I start talking gibberish. Okay, let's look at these examples. The first one is Pluto and Uranus. So here we have Ariana Grande. Okay. And we can see that Pluto is at 19 degrees, transiting her natal ascendant at 20 degrees of Capricorn. And she has also Neptune and Uranus at 20 degrees of Capricorn. So whenever we see Pluto crossing over a new house cusp, like it's right about to, like I said, whenever these slow planets, because they're so slow, like they're literally spending years and years and years in one sign, when they finally change signs or finally change houses, you will notice, you will see like how that affects that person. So during the time when Pluto was about to transit over her ascendant, and it was on top of Uranus, what's going on here? Okay, and on top of Neptune. This is actually around the time when the Manchester bombing happened. So Manchester bombing happened on May 22nd. So this is that time frame. So Pluto has not actually crossed over her ascendant. It's right there. It's a degree away. And we can also, so we wouldn't look at this and be like, oh, this is the day she's going to have this happen. That more so comes from the fact that she has Uranus making a square with her Mercury. So you can see Uranus 26 degrees of Aries is squaring Mercury at 27 degrees of Cancer. So as I've mentioned, Uranus brings about something that is unexpected and sudden, and Pluto brings about a very transformational period in which we oftentimes have to face loss in order to understand kind of what we're made of and what is truly important to us. And so here we can see that Pluto is moving over her ascendant, which is giving her a brand new cycle where she is being reborn into her power, where she's having to face deep psychological fears about herself as well as her role in this world, because her ascendant is how the world perceives her. It's how she shows up and what her role is in society in many ways. And so she's having Pluto here, and it's bringing up a lot of fear around this, around, being visible and around the kind of shadow sides of being famous and what can come as a result. And basically all the painful things that can happen, which she was made very well aware of from this sudden event with Uranus making a square to her Mercury. Her Mercury is also in her seventh house of others. So Uranus squaring here is indicating that she's having a sudden change in other people. In this case, it's her fans. And so this sudden change is a difficult one, and often will be with a Uranus square. Not always going to be the case. But we can see how this sudden event is going to lead to now years, as it passes over her ascendant, of self-evaluation, having to confront fear and pain and shadows around her role in this world and her impact and just kind of the world outside of her. And so we can see that this is a larger cycle, but with one event sort of triggering it, which can be mostly represented with that Uranus square. So let's look at another Pluto transit. This one is Cameron Diaz. I just don't know where to put my little video. Okay. This one is Cameron Diaz. She announced in March of 2018 that she was going to stop acting, that she had kind of taken a back seat. I think she had a child, was working on a wine company, and she's just like, I think I'm ready for this next chapter of my life. I don't think I want to do that anymore. And so Pluto, as I mentioned, is usually about some kind of loss, but mostly about transformation. Transformation often through letting go of something old and stepping into, who we were meant to be in a deeper way at this time in our lives. And so we can see that Pluto is approaching her descendant 20 degrees. Why does this keep changing? It's at 20 degrees and her descendant is at 22 degrees. So it's about to go over her relationship line. So this could really impact, as I mentioned, the seventh house, these close relationships, as well as her fans. We saw fans for people in Ariana's seventh house. So Cameron Diaz is going to have this change and transformation and maybe some loss in the relationship with her fans. Not likely loss, but just a shift of what was. Even more importantly, Venus is on Cameron Diaz's ascendant. And Venus is also her... oh, wait, no, it's not. Okay. So Venus is on her ascendant. So this is going to be around her womanhood, around her money, and then as well as maybe her kind of friendships and things of that nature. So Venus is going to play a big role in her, all of those areas of her life. So now that Pluto is opposite that, she's having this really big transformation. Any planets on the ascendant as well can represent our role in the world, as I was mentioning before, how the public perceives us. So she's really shifting this public persona. She's maybe going through some deep questions around her womanhood and her money and all of those things that I'm mentioning. And she's reassessing and making big life changes, and that's going to affect her relationship with the public. So again, this massive transformation of, I used to be this actress, was valued for my youth and my beauty and my art that I shared with the world, which is very Venus. So these are all Venus topics. And now I'm changing my relationship to that. I'm adjusting and moving into this different phase of my life. Jupiter was also opposing her moon. So this is a 12-year process, right? It only happens every 12 years. So the moon is motherhood. The moon is your emotional security. And also in the 11th house, it has a lot to do with her community and friends. So Jupiter opposing this is like, well, can I grow more as a friend? Can I be more involved in my community? Can I be a better mother? Or do I want to be a mother? Those are big questions that Jupiter opposite the moon will ask. And so it's giving her this time to really check in with, do I have more potential in this area of my life? Like, can I nurture myself more, nurture my family more? And the answer for her was yes. And so she transformed her role in society in order to do that. So this is Pluto and Jupiter, which is, I'm leaving this behind. But with Jupiter involved, it's not this tragedy. It's like something that she's excited, she's accepting, and now she has a new potential for growth with her wine business and her role as a mother. Okay, now we're going to look at Uranus and Saturn together. Not the most fun. Okay, there we go. Get me out of the way. Okay, so I'm sure many of you guys have heard, maybe not, I don't know, about Adam Levine. He's a singer. I think he's in Maroon 5. But he basically got exposed for texting young women. Of course, it's always so young. It's super annoying. Texting young women and like flirting with them, and he's saying, "Oh, I didn't cheat on my wife. I just was inappropriate." I'm like, "Okay, well, you're basically cheating." So, anywho, is what is like the most recent tea, I guess, in celebrity world. So, what was happening or what's happening right now when this is discovered? So, first of all, he has transiting Uranus in square with his natal Venus. Venus, as we mentioned, is a planet of relationships. However, for him, it's also his career planet. It is the ruler of his 10th house. So it's the public opinion as well. So Uranus is making a square to this. And as we saw with Ariana Grande, with Uranus squaring Mercury, she had a sudden change in her, in other people, with other people in her life, a sudden event. And now there's like sudden truth being revealed, which Uranus and Saturn both are planets of truth. So you start to see like the full reality come to the surface. So Uranus squaring Venus is like the sudden revelation within relationships that is available to the public. Also, Venus is the ruler of his third house of media and like social media, things like that. So it's very funny that all this kind of happened on social media. On top of this, he also had Saturn on his Venus. So this is a time in which you are really checking in with relationships, and there can be hardships in relationships. Do I want to further commit to this? Do I have what it takes? Is this relationship right for me? My relationship feels really strained right now. Am I going to put more effort in to meet these obstacles and overcome them, or am I going to relinquish and end this relationship? So Saturn on Venus can really strain money, for him strain public opinion, as well as his relationship in general, and maybe even his health, because Venus is in the 6th house of health. So he's having this really big check-in at this time in his relationship where there's a sudden event where it's causing negative reaction that he's having to deal with and I guess decide what his next steps are. So Uranus and Saturn are in a square together. His Venus is caught in between them like a little sandwich. So it's like this pressure cooker of, do I want something new or am I going to go with the old? Here's a surprising event where I'm going to have to pay off the karma of the past. That's really what Saturn and Uranus are about when they're interacting together. Lastly, he also has Pluto making a sextile to his moon. So this is a time in which he's going through some pretty big emotional shifts and family shifts because his moon is in the 4th house of family. So it's really going to transform what his home looks like, transform how secretive and shadowy he is. With this moon in Scorpio, he can be a little bit secretive. And it's bringing all that stuff to the surface and asking him to deal with the shadow of himself and what needs he's trying to meet by talking to these young girls and throwing away this beautiful life he has with his family. So a lot is coming up to the surface of his shadows for him to face and to learn from. Okay, up next we have Neptune and Jupiter, and I think this might be the last one if I'm not mistaken. So it was kind of hard to find Neptune transits for celebrities, and I think that this is a great example because it is a pretty much exact square with Neptune. So Prince Harry and Meghan, they leave the royal family duties. I'm not quite sure how to like categorize it. Like they left the royal family. They're no longer part of that scene over in England right now. At the time of this recording, but who knows, with the Queen's passing, that might change. So during this time, Prince Harry had Neptune making a pretty much exact square to his natal Mars. So both at 16 degrees. Neptune, 16 degrees of Pisces, exact square with his Mars and Sagittarius in the 12th house. So Mars is about our action. It's about our manlyhood. It's about our anger. It's our energy. It's our drive. It's our sexuality. It's all these things. So all of those things are undergoing some big shifts for him with this Neptune square. As I mentioned, Neptune kind of asks us to take a step back and can also kind of drain us and make us prone to illness. So I could definitely see him being a little bit weakened at this time physically, maybe having a little bit less energy than usual, although we're going to talk about Jupiter in a second, which is helping counteract this. Jupiter on his ascendant. But overall, he may feel a little bit less driven than he usually was, less of a fighter than he was, like trying to fight for the right to stay in the family and for things to improve. It's like, nah, I'm done with that. I'm taking a step back. And the reason why it's particularly taking a step back from his family is because Mars is the ruler of his fourth house. He has his fourth house cusp in Aries. The planet that rules Aries is Mars. So he's in particular taking a step back from his role within his family and as well within the public as a result of that. And so we can really see this kind of surrendering. It is the idea of retiring or having a child and stepping away from, your life and your social life and your everyday routine, and really kind of being absorbed into something internal behind the scenes or new. And so we can really see him take a step out of the limelight and away from his family. We can also see that he was going through a Jupiter return. So Jupiter had just returned to 3 degrees of Capricorn and pass it to 8 degrees. And so this is a new cycle of growth. So Harry is asking himself, what do I want for my family? I'm about to have another kid. I don't know if I can continue like this. I'm feeling restricted in this area. And this Neptune squaring his Mars is like, I can't fight for this anymore. This is not what's best for my family. I have to take a step back. I have to walk away. And so we really see that this walking away is for growth within himself and his family. So he's putting this energy elsewhere. It's not that he's just giving up and retiring and going and hiding under a hole. It's that he's having to start a new journey now, earn money a new way, live in a new place, and have new customs, routines, expectations, a new future. And it's all for his family. So we can really start to see how this has affected him, but in a positive way. At this time, he also had Saturn and Pluto in his first house trining his sun, which is giving him, again, these new responsibilities and a transformation of his manlyhood and purpose in life. And then lastly, another Neptune transit. He had Neptune move opposite his sun in May and June of 2021. This was during the birth of his daughter. So his daughter Lilibet was born during this time, and the sun is our purpose, our identity, our career. It represents the father in our chart. So at this time, Neptune opposing it is asking him again to really check in about his identity. When his daughter was born, it's very likely he was going through these existential questions of how am I going to provide? How am I going to be the best father I can be? What is my new life direction? And how can I basically make sure that whatever identity I create is going to benefit this beautiful new daughter of mine? And so there's these big existential questions and kind of, different way of identifying himself, like really dissolving who he used to be, dissolving the ego, and transforming and building himself back up into a new person as a new father. And so you can really see how all this plays out with his Neptune transits. And he's really kind of releasing or stepping out of old identities and into new ones with these Neptune transits. So that is what I see for this. I hope that you guys enjoyed this. Please do share this with everyone if you found this helpful, and please subscribe and comment down below. I appreciate you guys so much. Check out my quiz on my website if you want to learn about your dominant planet, the planet that best represents you. It can be super helpful and interesting, and I hope to see you guys there. Bye.